Thank you, Marcelo. If I can have the first slide. I gave the obituary yesterday, so I thought I should talk about new births. So we're going to talk about how do we get out of this mess. While I'm going to use this report, which we just released, let me skip that. 2 weeks ago in the UN, it was chaired by Maria Molina, Durwood Zalke, a legal expert, and myself with 33 authors. So it sort of roughly represents what we think about how much time we have. So I'm going to address 3 issues. How much time we have to avoid catastrophic effects, okay? And what we came up with is this Paris as the foundation, starting with that as the 4 blocks. So the first one is the Paris Agreement and the INDC. Then we say we need to enhance it with several sister agreements. The Kigali HFC is one, ban one of the short-lived climate pollutants, the ICAO, and several others. The 4th we put there is subnational activities. The model for that, we will hear from our Governor Jerry Brown, where California has signed agreement with over 170 jurisdictions, states, cities, to go on its path. The 3rd is then we say we need to pull 3 levers. The first 2 levers is make the planet carbon neutral, and the second lever is to pull down the short-lived climate pollutants so we can get some quick relief from climate change in the next 20, 30 years. As many of us figured out, these 2 are not enough anymore. These 2 would have done the job if you started 10 years ago. We need to take out the CO2 out of the air. And in fact, I should give credit to Jim Hansen. He has been talking about 350 parts per million as the boundary. I didn't think at that time it was necessary, but now it's clear we need to draw down the CO2. But let me give you the scientific background for this. I led a group of 50 researchers from UC, all branches. They're humanities, social sciences, superb technologists. And in fact, it was my vice chairs were Dan Kamen and Fauna Farman. And we came up with the solutions for this. So what we think of, that as providing the background, and these 10 solutions providing the implementation of that. So, and our motivation, just before we got started on this, Pope Francis released his encyclical. So he talks about intragenerational equity as cry of the earth to be heard with the cry of the poor. I just love that sentence. That summarizes the guiding principle for climate mitigation. I just want to add, remember I showed you the aircraft which has a 1 in 20 chance of coming down, and we are sending our children and grandchildren on that aircraft. So I just added, copying Pope Francis, cry of the earth to be heard with the cry of our children and grandchildren. So these are the 10 solutions we came under these 6 clusters. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to talk by half because we are running out of time. First is science solutions, and then you have governance solutions. We heard some superb way of doing this from the Minister of Peru. Market regulations, I have a feeling we'll hear from our Senator Kevin De Leon and maybe Governor Brown. And the technology-based solutions. I'm going to talk about those too. But let me tell you what the problem we are facing. Remember I said we came with 3 categories of climate change. 1.5, 3 to 3 is dangerous climate change. 3 to 5 catastrophic. 5 and beyond, we call it existential threat. We already touched on that. So we are somewhere in those 3 curves on the right. How do we move to the left and follow the green curve, okay? The only difference in our approach is that we are not only talking about 50% probability, but also 10% probability. So let me go to this. This is the issue yesterday Joost Lelyfeld brought. Remember I said it's best to think of greenhouse gases as a blanket. Just like a blanket traps your body heat in the winter, these gases trap the heat coming from the planet. So I'm showing you the thickness of the CO2 blanket. The area under the curve shows how thick it is. And then the non-CO2 greenhouse gases, methane, halocarbons is part of CFCs, nitrous oxide comes from fertilizer, ozone is an air pollutant, and then black carbon. And the issue we talked about is this aerosols are cooling, have a cooling effect. So think of the masking effect as mirrors on this blanket. These particulates, when you see this pollution, they're reflecting sunlight back, okay? So without this mask, I estimated using this IPCC, the planet should have already heated up to 2.5 degrees, about 2.3 degrees. The reason we have not seen that is the masking effect, which is about 7 to 8 tenths of a degree. Another 6 tenths of a degree is in the ocean because of the inertia. That ocean will cough it up in the next 20, 30 years. So the only way we are going to get out of this, we need to remove that mask because of the air pollution health effects. 6.5 million are dying and so many other damages. But when you remove that, you're going to see the full beast of the greenhouse effect. So what we are pleading for, when you cut air pollution, also cut the greenhouse gases. We are just pulling one lever and leaving the other one off. So we are not saying don't cut air pollution, we have to. But doing that without pulling on the greenhouse lever, you're just going to see a short-term burst of just about 6 tenths of a degree warming just from that. So that was what the 3 levers is based on. I must tell you, while we talk about the cooling effect of the aerosols, these particulates are causing decrease in rainfall. So removing the air pollution on the one hand could warm just the cooling aerosol, but it will increase the rainfall, okay? Greenhouse gas increase should have caused at least 4 to 5% increase in precipitation. We have not seen that because when you cut sunlight going into the ocean, remember these are mirrors, aerosols. When you cut sunlight going into the ocean, you're going to reduce evaporation. This is one of the most consensus agreement in all climate models. Aerosols cut down rainfall, okay? At least the IPCC models. So our science solution is bend the warming curve immediately by cutting the short-lived climate pollutants. So what do we mean by that? See, the only way we're going to get out of this is thin these blankets. The carbon dioxide blanket, you cannot thin it because it's lifetime 100 years. The only way you can thin the CO2 blanket is suck that CO2 out of the air. That's our third lever, okay? Whereas the black carbon, that black carbon up here heating the planet was just emitted a month ago. It's so short-lived. So if we cut the black carbon from the diesel, biomass has a cooling, and just the diesel part, which is half the black carbon forcing, they're gone a month from now. If all the diesel particular filters, okay? But the diesel cutting out will cut the NOx. It's a complex issue. So on the other hand, the halocarbons, HFCs, is 10 years' time. Methane lifetime is 10 years. So the methane blanket was what we emitted over the last 20, 25 years. Same way, we stop the emission, the blanket will thin. Whereas CO2, stopping the emission won't thin the blanket, it'll prevent it from expanding. So you can all ask, how come you have not heard about these? We only hear about CO2. It's because if I show this graph, what's going to happen 50 years from now, CO2 would fill that whole screen. The other gases would still have the same size. So by making the planet carbon neutral, we are preventing that blanket from getting thicker and thicker and thicker. That's what it's going to happen, okay? So I don't want you to, whereas the short-lived climate pollutants, we can reduce the climate effect by cutting their emissions. So this is a diagram for there's a major group called Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Our minister from Chile was the chair of that. It was formed by Hillary Clinton, and we are joined by our US Congressman, Scott Peters. He pushed for this, cutting down the short-lived climate in the House, and is still advancing that. So what we are saying is that you can see the top curve is the business as usual, and we cut the CO2 beginning from 2020, 3 years from now, and we drew it down to 0 by 2050, but you don't see its effect in another 30, 40 years. So how do you prevent the thing overshooting? So you cut the short-lived climate pollutants, you see how that curve bends immediately. And when you add the two, you have a reasonable chance of keeping the planet under 2. But that's a 50% probability. Remember I told you about the 5% probability it could still shoot to 3, 4 degrees. So how do we address that? So here I'm showing the summary of the numbers came from this group study we did. Interestingly, the energy intensity, keeping fossil fuels, but cutting down the intensity, carbon intensity of the energy, that is, how much tons of carbon you put per GDP, that alone would save us close to 1 degree. And this has been done by IPC, other studies. I don't think we are saying anything different. The second is you decarbonize beginning from 2030. You can cut down the warming by 1.6 to 1.9 if you start bending the curve 3 years from now. And then the short-lived climate pollutants would give you about 1.2 degree cooling. And the problem is unmasking the aerosol would add about 0.6 of a degree in hours. But there's a huge uncertainty in that. So what we find is to keep the planet even the 10% probability below the catastrophic levels, you have to take 1 trillion tons of CO2 out of the air. Okay? So that is just a technical solution. It's easy to do it in a model and bend the curves. So how do you make it happen? This group of 50 UC faculty, the societal transformation came on the top. Number 2 and 3, before governance, before technology, before anything. So we promoted that global culture of climate action, communication, and several. I don't think I have time to go into all that. But I'll just tell you how we are now promoting the UC system, a climate solution course, with the vision that it will bring out 1 million climate warriors, educate all our undergraduates. We want to export it to other nations. Our slogan is California today, the nation tomorrow, and the world tomorrow. Let me skip all that because I don't have time. I just want to talk about this, how the alliance between science and religion through this church. First meeting I organized with Paul Crutzen, I have never seen the statement in any scientific, the end of it was added by Marcello. We concluded that document, if we want justice and peace, we must protect the habitat that sustains us, okay? Next was the meeting Partha Dasgupta and I organized. We summarized it in science, what we concluded in a group like this, that finding ways to develop a sustainable relationship with our planet requires not only the engagement of scientists, political leaders, and civil societies, but ultimately also a moral revolution. Religious institutions can and should take the lead on bringing about such a new attitude towards creation. Then after Laudato Si, this is the Laudato Si Francis effect. It had a huge impact on public. When I say huge, it's 5 to 10%, but that's a huge number to move the needle. And then the science again invited Marcello and me to write an article on integral ecology. And I just want to say a concluding statement. The real innovation is this new synergy between science, policy, and religion. On the issue of environment, there is a tremendous synergy between science, policy, and religion, and we will see those discussions tomorrow. It'll come out. So what I've finished telling you is that we have still a chance to move away from this existential threat to the green curve. Is that enough? Definitely not. I think many said yesterday we have to prepare society for some still climate change. We have to adapt to this. I don't see any way we can avoid 2 degrees if you're worried about 20 to 30% probability. Okay? So the positive note, the climate mitigation train has already left. And I drew this diagram a year and a half ago, thinking about all the nations who are not on that train. Now I wonder, I'm hoping our Congressman Scott Peters would address, I think that's the Americans left behind. So the positive 8 million people are in the renewable industry. So it's a huge momentum already. We should cash in on it. And the beauty is American emissions and EU emissions have been trending slightly downwards. That curve is not going down, but it's not rising. Okay, the carbon emissions from the US and Europe is about close to 0% growth. So that's, and there are 53 cities and 65 industries are already decarbonizing. We heard from Chilean minister, I didn't know about this, and we'll hear about what California and cities like San Diego are living laboratories. We'll hear it from our congressman and our Senate President and Governor Jerry Brown. And we concluded in this document, bottom efforts are needed to scale technologies upwards. There's tremendous support on the top, but it has to come from the bottom up too. I leave there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.